my volume starts to drop. Don't do this, because then I'll think you're going. Do this. So I am Susie Tierney. I actually go to St. Timothy's Episcopal in West Des Moines, and as Bishop said, I am a postulate. I don't have my own website, and I haven't written a book, so the bar has been significantly lower than it's really low here. I do, however, have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I consider it a small feat that my hair is combed.
Well done.
Thank you. And everything is zipped. So I have been doing social outreach or some sort of social ministry or advocacy for 25 plus years. And I've managed to actually be open to learning a few things along the way, I hope. And so this afternoon, I am going to be walking through a process of how to do effective social outreach and advocacy. And it will include naming issues that are present in your community and discerning what your congregational gifts and skills are. And then, moving into how to cultivate leadership and then develop leadership. And then how to collaborate, and most importantly, how to build relationships. So that's all going to be this afternoon. So I thought about, well, how would I frame the morning just to give you a little taste, and especially for those who won't be going to my particular breakout session. Not that I'm going to hold it against any of you at all. But if you're not going to I thought what would be helpful just to frame how to do social outreach effectively. So I came up with, this is actually a list that I've used in presentations for years, and I'm going to share it with you today. It's Susie's top 10 components of effective social outreach or advocacy. So these are the things in my experience of doing social outreach or social advocacy work that feel like some of the most important things that have to be present or have to, the component that you have to have if you're going to be really effective about what you do. And to be church. So anyway, and first and foremost, and this probably is not going to be surprising to anybody, number one, it has to be rooted in prayer. So St. Francis, I'm actually Franciscan at heart. I'm connected to a religious community in Dubuque, the Dubuque Franciscan Sisters. I share their charism passionately. I share St. Francis charism, which is wonderful and a little bit crazy. But he said, contemplation, when we talk about a contemplative, I don't think we have the fullest definition of the word contemplation or contemplative, because when we talk about a contemplative, we talk about somebody who is very prayerful and reflective and spends a lot of time in prayer and quiet with themselves. But a real contemplative lives prayer. So in other words, if you take somebody like St. Francis of Assisi, he prayed in these little itty-bitty caves in the hills of Assisi. I've never been there. I aspire to go one day. But he prayed in these little caves, but his prayer wasn't stagnant. His prayer compelled him to do ministry in the marketplace. And then his ministry in the marketplace compelled him back to his prayer life in the caves. That's a contemplative. You actually become your prayer and you extend it to the world. Or if you're talking about it congregationally, you become church to the world. So that's really at the heart of social outreach, is it's got to be rooted in prayer. And in my mind, I've seen people do social outreach or attempt to do social ministry and not have it rooted in prayer. And sometimes it's not only ineffective, but it can actually be a little bit dangerous. So that was number one. And these aren't in any particular order. I haven't prioritized them, so take them for what they are. And you may have other things that you would add to this list as well. So number two, born of sacred anger. That's a wonderful phrase I pulled out of a book called St. Francis and the Foolishness of God. Sacred anger. any social movement or social change has happened because people were angry. Not angry in the I'm violent and I'm going to destroy you, or I'm going to be hateful or vicious or whatever, but angry in the sense that this is an injustice that should not be. You can think about it right now, whether you agree with it or not. There's this whole movement around the Me Too and the women's rights right now. You can feel the anger in the community that's saying this injustice, this disparity of how women have been looked at or viewed or whatever should not be. Civil rights movement, this disparity of race should not be. This, name your issue. And all of these social movements have been born out of some kind of anger that was directed in a really positive way that changed the world. Or could have the potential to change the world. So born of sacred anger. The third component is friends and companions, community. It's so cliche, but there is strength in numbers. There really is strength in numbers. You ask any community organizing group director how much strength there is in numbers. Ask any, if you're part of a union leader. Ask any Knights of Columbus leader. Ask any women's Bible study group. There is strength in numbers. Anybody that goes in, especially in the work of social outreach and social ministry and impacting needs in the world, if you go in that solo without a group of people to support you, I guarantee you probably won't last very long. And you won't last very long because issues are heavy and they wear on you. And so the strength in the numbers part is that you have people that hold you up to do the work, that you can vent to and say, this was really tough, I had this experience, and people to share in your ministry with you. So even as cliche as it is, I would say that would be one of my top 10 would be community, friends, companions. Also in this book, St. Francis and the Foolishness, it's got a really old copyright, but if you ever have a chance to pick it up, do. It's got some great stuff in there. St. Francis and the Foolishness of God. There's this quote in here. It's trickier today, I think, than it has ever been, though, this community piece. Because there's so many more layers that you have to move aside to build community. And I'm talking about some of the technology that's beautiful and wonderful. You heard Mary talk about Facebook. But it also does not build community. That is not it builds a different, it connects people, but it's not a community building tool in my mind. And so there are things that you have to strip away to get to community. Here's a quote in that book, and you can tell how dated it is. The paraphernalia of modern life tends to drive people apart. The Walkman. Is there anybody in here that doesn't know what a Walkman is? Okay. Or otherwise known as iPod. The home video or Netflix. Automobile, burglar alarms, the impersonal shopping mall, the home as fortress mentality, all keep us separated from one another. In addition to overwhelming forces that surround us, including powerful and centralized governments, global business interests, giant media conglomerates, dwarf the individual to the point where we wonder if we are living or being lived. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of, it sounds like, oh, community, that's easy. But we have to strip away a little bit to get to community, I think, first. So that would be the third thing that I would say. Fourth thing for effective advocacy, realistic or doable. Doable is one of my favorite words. I find myself using it a lot. And I've been putting it in quotations, but I'm just going to claim it as a regular word and stop putting it in quotations and just use it regularly. Doable. And what I mean by that is sometimes we set, I feel like sometimes we might set our sights a little high. We're gonna, let me give you an extreme example. I know we can end world hunger. I know that at the core of my being. We have the capacity to end world hunger. But what is my part in that? My part is not ending world hunger. My part is what's my corner of the universe, and what am I being called to in my corner of the universe? If we do that well, if we figure out what our corner of the universe is and what we're being called to in that corner of the universe in terms of engaging with the needs of the world, that's world-changing, folks. That builds the ground for people like Martin Luther King to rise out of, like Rosa Parks to rise out of, like Oscar Romero and Dorothy Day and Gandhi and Desmond Tutu and folks like that. So realistic or doable. If we go at it like, what's my piece to do to impact this particular issue? Where am I at? 4? 5. Dialogue driven. This one, my colleagues at Just Faith Ministries National, I have said this in a staff meeting recently. I think dialogue is one of the most radical things that we can write into our programs right now. And by radical, I don't mean liberal, I mean radical, countercultural. Dialogue is countercultural. And what I mean by that is dialogue is an act of listening. It's not an act of talking, it's an act of listening. So you sit with two people who may be on very different sides of an issue or a perspective or a life circumstance, and the ability to just simply listen to each other in that instance. As we stand here this morning on the morning that our government is shut down, right? Has that been resolved at all? Does anybody know?
It hadn't at 9:30.
It's the ultimate national indicator of a lack of dialogue. Right? The people are not listening to each other. Some people, though, I would say, again, it's not semantics, but it is about understanding what dialogue means so well. Some people fear dialogue because they think, oh my gosh, if I listen to somebody else, then I'm going to have to believe part of what they say. And that's only partially true. You have to, if you enter into dialogue, you have to understand that every person on the planet holds a piece of the truth and that we don't have it all, not any one of us. And so what piece of the truth do they hold? But I can be in a dialogue with somebody and discern what piece of the truth that they hold and still be very firm in my conviction about what I feel about a particular issue. So it's not about getting somebody to come over to your side. It's really an act of listening. So dialogue driven. That is the most effective social outreach and advocacy tool. That is one of the most effective outreach tools that you could have. Compassionate. And I'm talking radical, again, radical biblical compassion. Countercultural compassion. There is, how many of you are familiar with Greg Boyle, Father Greg Boyle, the Catholic priest? Some of you. He wrote the book Tattoos on the Heart. Familiar with that? He works with Father Greg. By the way, just a bit of a commercial. We invited him to Des Moines, and he's coming. So if you are familiar with Father Greg Boyle, I will get an announcement to the Episcopal Diocese, but he's actually coming. He accepted our invitation, thanks be to God, and so he will be a joy to have in September. The first Saturday in September, so stay tuned. But Father Greg Boyle, his ministry is with gangs in Los Angeles, and his book is about the creation of a whole industry where gang members hold up. So they have a bakery, they have a tattoo removal, they have a clothing shop, they have job training. There's this whole industry where he literally has rival gangbangers working side by side in this industry. When I say compassion, I'm talking about two words that he uses in the book that just strike me, and they strike me as so gospel, I can't even stand it. The no matter whatness of God. No matter what you've ever done in your whole entire life, you are never beyond the reach of God's love. The expansiveness of God. No matter how far you move away from God, you are never outside of the reach of God's love. That's radical biblical compassion. So that's what we have to take into, because we're going to make judgments. It's our human nature. But even in our judgments, if that's the lens that you have when you're interacting with people, then it's a very different interaction than I think you should have done this with your life, or I think you should have done that. It's, wow, God loves you unconditionally, and how can I be of service in that way? A witness as much as words. Now, Mary might disagree with me on this point, or maybe she would agree with me. The two go hand in hand. Just like prayer and action are two separate things. You live prayer and action. A witness as much as words. That they've actually polled folks, millennials and people younger than me, and they've come up with a litany in a lot of polls that they've done. They've come up with a litany of 5 or 6 top things, reasons why people are not attracted to church. And one of the biggies is, you talk a good talk, but you don't do. You know, you say you're all about this, but you don't do it. And so it has to be a witness as much as it is words. And in some cases, it might even be more of a witness than it is words. Because the words will come if the witness is there. And what I mean by that is, let me give you a very small example. When I was I was a food pantry manager for several years, and when I was a food pantry manager, when I first started, I went in and nobody in the place was recycling. Now, I said I was Franciscan, so yes, I'm a tree hugger, yes, I love this gorgeous planet. And so I walked in and I'm like, oh, nobody in the building is recycling. And I simply went into this little kitchenette that we had, probably nobody goes in this, and there was a garbage can there, and everybody was throwing everything in the garbage can. And I said nothing to not a single person. And I got a second garbage can, and I put it next to the garbage can, and I put recycle, and then I put garbage. And every single person in the building started recycling. I never said a word. That's living your faith that this gorgeous token of affection that God has given us, Ronald Sider's words, gorgeous token of affection, deserves to be as treated as well as we treat each other. And so you do it by doing this. What compelled me? My faith did, for heaven's sakes. That's when you talk about it. What compelled me? Because God created this gorgeous token of affection. 3 more. 8. Creative. I think sometimes when people are engaging with the needs of the world, whether it's in your community or you're on a global mission trip, people want to throw creativity out. I've got this checkoff list of things that I do. This is how you serve, and you forget that we were given these brains for a reason, and we need to be as creative as possible. Creativity changes systems. One of the most creative things that I've heard about in a long time, and it was where everybody was really into recycling, so this will give you some context. But Bread for the World, who deals with global hunger, they had a letter writing campaign one year on the issue of hunger, of course. There was some sort of legislation or some bill that was being funded, and they were advocating for funding for eliminating hunger. And that year they had everybody do their offering of letters, which is the letter that you write to your congressperson, on paper plates. Loved it. What a great idea. Can you imagine how attention getting that would be if you're a congressperson and you start getting, if you haven't picked it up already, I'm a person who loves to laugh and I like to be around joyful people. I went on a trip to, with Catholic Relief Services to Haiti. And Haiti has some of the most gut-wrenching poverty I've ever seen. And so, and it was quite a number, and it also has some of the most beautiful people I've ever met, with such wonderful spirits. But I can also tell you that that was one of the funnest trips I've ever had in my life, because in the midst of this poverty, and in the midst of this wowed by this human spirit, every time we were in a vehicle, we laughed, and we laughed, and we laughed at each other, and we laughed, and some of us had rum sours, and we laughed more. Some of us had 2 rum sours, and we really, really laughed. And so, anyway, a sense of humor. When you lose your sense of humor and you're trying to do social outreach, you may as well hang it up, because it is so heavy. And the only way that you can really do it and do it effectively is to engage your sense of humor, which is also really healthy. Last, number 10, hopeful, which I know is so hard because the needs can be so vast, and they feel so big, and they feel so daunting, and they feel so unhopeful, if that's a word right. But as Christians, we are resurrection people. It's at the core of our faith that we're called to be people, resurrection people, who believe that anything is possible. One of my very favorite poems in the entire world, in fact, my favorite poem, is a poem by Emily Dickinson. And Emily Dickinson writes, "I dwell in possibility." And the last line of that poem is, "Spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise." I dwell in possibility. People doing social outreach have to dwell in the possibility that change can happen. Even if it's small, even if it's only right then, but the potential is always bigger than right then and that small. So, those are my top 10. Maybe you have others. I'll be anxious to interact this afternoon. The presentation that I'm going to do is going to be much more interactive. I'm actually going to walk you through a 6-month to a year-long process in 2 hours. It ought to be fun. And it will be very interactive.